This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome to This Week in Richmond, and welcome two of the eminent political science professors in the Commonwealth of Virginia, Dr. Quentin Kidd, and both of you teach political science, but the director of the Watson Center at Christopher Newport, and Dr. Lauren Bell, in addition to teaching, also the Dean of Academic Affairs at Randolph, Macon, a college that's been in the news some here in Central Virginia recently.
Just a little, yeah.
But really interested in having you explain to our viewers what happened in this most recent election, and then anything that you might see that foretells or doesn't foretell for the future. I know you all did a great deal of polling. You did some exit polling. So tell us about the polling that you were doing and how you saw that race kind of closing, and then chime in with the exit polling, and I will be delighted to listen to the two of you discuss this.
Well, we're used to talking for 50 minutes, so I hope you...
You're going to have to jump in and
That's
cut us
right,
off.
yeah,
Yes,
right.
absolutely.
So the first poll we did, polling Warner and Gillespie, was back in January. We had Warner up by 20 points. And throughout the summer and into the very early, what I call campaign season, the post-Labor Day season, I mean, Warner maintained this pretty sizable lead. And it was really late in the last 2 weeks or so that a lot of independent, non-party affiliated, and Republican voters decided that they were going to vote, and then they decided how they were going to vote. So, in addition to being up by such a large margin throughout the spring and summer and into the early fall, there was a pretty sizable percentage of undecided voters during that time. And I think in the end what happened, we'll be interested in what you have to say about this, but I think in the end what happened is a lot of those undecided voters broke Gillespie or didn't vote. And there were a significant number of Warner voters who ended up not voting. And I think the Virginia electorate got caught up in this national wave late in the last couple of weeks. And the last poll we did, we had Warner up 7. We had Warner at 51, we had Gillespie at 44, we had Jarvis at 2, and we had 3% undecided. And I think all three of those percentage points went to Gillespie, those undecideds. And some of those Warner voters didn't show up. So we were right on with the Warner numbers within the margin of error. We were right on with the Jarvis numbers. We were just outside of the margin of error for the Gillespie numbers. And we could see that break happening. Our last 2 nights in the field in our last survey, we had Warner up 3 points. So we could see the break happening, but at that point it was too late for us to stay in the field any longer. So.
Sure. Well, I agree completely, and I think certainly we saw that Democratic turnout was much lower than I think we had anticipated. There was a virtually no turnout among what I might call Obama voters, those individuals who really, I think in 2008 and 2012, mobilized to vote because they were inspired by Barack Obama. And many of those were in African American communities. In the exit polling that we did, we saw very, very low numbers of minority voters. So I think there was a shift in kind of the demographics of the electorate, nationally we saw a shift in the demographics of the electorate. It was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly male, and much older than we might have anticipated. And I think in Virginia we saw the same thing. And when that's what your demographic profile of your voter looks like, it's not going to be as favorable for Democratic candidates. So I think that's, again, part of the story.
And Virginia was not on any of the list of the national folks list about the state that might make the difference in who controls the Senate. And
yeah, no, I mean, they emerged on that list very late, as we
Yes.
all know. I think it's for a couple of reasons. Mark Warner was in a very unique position for a statewide elected official. You know, he left the governor's office with higher approval ratings than he was elected. It's really rare for an elected official to leave office after having served 4 years and having made very difficult decisions about budget cuts, and leave more popular than you came in. And then he won a pretty resounding race when he ran for Senate. And so I think people thought of him as in a different place. And he carved out this impression, this image of him as this kind of moderate, not too partisan, guy who really tried to work both sides of the aisle. And I think a lot of people who were prognosticating about which races would be competitive and which races wouldn't be looked at him and said, he's basically got his position locked down for as long as he wants it because of the kind of character he is and the kind of impression he's carved out for himself. And it just proved not to be true.
But I think we also have to give credit to Ed Gillespie. I mean, Ed Gillespie ran a pretty solid campaign. It's interesting, I was interviewed a few weeks before the election, and a reporter said to me, well, is Ed Gillespie just sort of the Republican sacrificial lamb? You know, who agrees to go up against Mark Warner, and, does any Republican have a chance? And I said, given Ed Gillespie's background, this is not someone who I think just sort of takes one for the team and says, okay, I'll stick my neck out even though I don't expect to win. I think clearly that Gillespie and the people working with him saw a potential path to victory, saw some vulnerabilities. I mean, one of the ones is that, Mark Warner had been, and really in practice as a member of the Senate, had been very bipartisan, had worked with both sides of the aisle. But in fact, Gillespie was right. He voted 97% of the time with Barack Obama in the last Congress. Well, in an election where your undecideds are still thinking about it late in the game, that's a very effective pitch to make, to say, this guy says he's a moderate, but look at his voting record. Is he really? And I think it raised some questions and was really very effective on the part of the Gillespie campaign. So I think to suggest solely that this was the wave, I think also doesn't quite give enough credit to the Gillespie team. I think they really worked very hard. They did a great job with get out the vote efforts, the Republican Party of Virginia, and also the Gillespie team on its own. And so I think Warner wouldn't have struggled as much against a candidate who really had just sort of been set up to take the fall. But I think Gillespie made a very formidable candidate in this particular election.
Some of the national numbers I saw, and I haven't fact-checked those to see if they're correct, but had maybe Florida voting 70-some%. They had a whole list of states, and then Virginia about 41%. Is that somewhat accurate? Was the voter turnout in Virginia much less than in states where there was thought to be very competitive races?
Yeah,
You've probably looked at these.
I did look at that, and I don't remember exactly if it was 41%, but we were much, much lower than many other states. And I think, again, that there was a wave of Obama voters in Virginia in 2008 and 2012, and I think that group just simply didn't turn out. And I think it makes some sense when you look at the fact that, for example, the 3rd Congressional District, Congressman Bobby Scott was running unopposed. The narrative was that Senator Warner was going to win without really struggling. So in areas where you have high concentrations of Democratic voters, there wasn't necessarily the motivation to go out and vote that there might have been if the narrative had been that the election were going to be closer. So I mean, in that sense, it was sort of a perfect storm, right? The election starts to close in the final days of the campaign, and people start to get a little bit nervous, but there's not time to really mobilize, get out the vote efforts and
Right.
encourage people that you really do need to make time on Tuesday because things are going to be closer than we thought. So I think turnout was really a huge part of the
Also,
story.
I mean, compare, I even say compare 2013 to the governor's race. I mean, 2008 and 2012, you've got Barack Obama on the top of the ticket, that is enough to that's what mobilizes the Obama voters. But I think the McAuliffe campaign of the Democrats in 2013 did a good job of linking their larger efforts to this Obama coalition.
That's right.
There was a reason to vote for Terry McAuliffe. I mean, he was out saying this is why you should vote for me. In other words, there were two arguments that the McAuliffe campaign made: vote for me because of this reason, and don't vote for him because of that reason. I'm not sure the Warner campaign made those two arguments very effectively. I think they made the argument, don't vote for him, Gillespie, because of these reasons, but I don't think they made the argument, vote for me for these positive reasons. And I think that's what you have to reach out to those Democratic coalition voters, the Obama voters, and energize them and mobilize them. And it probably would have helped if Obama had been out saying, we need your vote. I mean, hindsight's 20/20, but I look back at this and I say, what would Democrats have lost if they had had Obama on the campaign trail, for 3 weeks prior to election day? I don't know that they would have lost anything, and they probably would have saved a couple of these seats that they lost by 2 or 3 percentage points.
When you look at states that had referenda ballot questions where they were really asking questions that were much more in line with Democratic policies, right? So Washington State and tougher gun control laws, the series of legalization of marijuana questions that were on ballots, the minimum wage questions, they all passed. These are all things that the Democrats have been clamoring for nationally and within the states as well. So it's not that the electorate clearly made a statement that they are repudiating the policies that the Democrats are promoting. In fact, when given a specific choice, they went in favor of the position that the Democrats had taken. So I think you're absolutely right. If the Democrats had not been so afraid, as one satirist said, to be Democrats, right?
Exactly.
That they might actually have benefited from getting the president out and encouraging those people who might vote only because he really was inspiring to them.
This is one of the reasons I don't think that this represents some fundamental shift in Virginia. I've had a couple of reporters ask, "Is this a fundamental shift? What does this mean?" I just think it means what I think it's meant for 8 years now. There are essentially 2 electorates in Virginia. Republicans do a pretty good job of mobilizing their electorate in off-year elections and off-year elections, and they did a good job of mobilizing their electorate in this election. Democrats typically do a better job of mobilizing their electorate during presidential years. They did a good job in the governor's race last year. That's the nature of being a purple state, is that sometimes Republicans are going to win big, sometimes they're going to win close, sometimes Democrats are going to win big, sometimes they're going to win close. That's what being in a purple competitive state is all about. So it doesn't represent to me some fundamental change. It just represents the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia as it is now.
Yeah, when I've been asked the question, what happened, I think part of the answer is that the Democrats kind of got schooled. They had sort of pioneered all these get out the vote efforts, certainly going back to 2008, and using social media and really kind of figuring out how to get people out to the polls. And I think they got complacent. And I think, it's not that the Republicans did a better job on social media. They're no better. They're probably worse when it comes to using the electronic forms of communication, but they just had a better ground game as far as getting flyers into people's homes. Not just, vote for Gillespie. In fact, most of what they sent into people's homes wasn't vote for Gillespie. It was, hey, don't forget to get your absentee ballot if you're not going to be able to go to the polls. Or don't forget you can vote absentee in person up until this particular date. And so they really, I think, just did a better job with the fundamentals.
There was a point in time that there was some pulling of advertising by the Gillespie campaign, and I remember I was in the southwestern part of the state, and a friend was telling me that, and he was reading that to say it was all over.
Well, so was everybody else. When that started leaking out that he had pulled his ads off, all the TV stations, literally people were looking at his finance reports up to that point and showing that he was, pretty desperate on the financial front. So the assumption was he can't pay for them. He's allotted this time that he can't pay for, so he's pulling that allotment back. Part of that was true. Part of it was he was broke. Let's not forget, he loaned his campaign the money to run that last week and a half's barrage of television ads, it proved to be super effective. So it was really it was a stop
And then
and
come
pivot.
back, yeah.
And it was
Interesting.
just really effective.
And again, demonstrated how much more effectively I think the Gillespie campaign was at reading the electorate and reading what was going on.
It caught everybody, including I think the Warner campaign, off guard. I think even the Warner campaign thought he's broke. This is it. And so I don't think they were ready for that last, charge.
No, Warner didn't spend what he could have. I mean, Warner ended the campaign with something like $8 million that he could have spent and didn't. And you say why, but I think he had no sense that it would be close and that there'd be a need to do that. And so then, if you don't have to, you don't.
Right. Going into Election Day, I was told by some people inside the Warner campaign that they were expecting a 5-point win. I think that just is an indication of how caught off guard they were.
You maybe have said this already, but let me reflect it back to you. Is part of what you're saying about that if you have one candidate who's running as a party person, another one running as a centrist, it doesn't really get out the base of that other party? Was running as a centrist, if the two of you were running the campaign
Sure.
now, would you run Mark Warner as a centrist, or would you emphasize more the Democrat roots?
I think Mark Warner is a centrist.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think he ran. He ran. He was on the defensive most of the campaign. I mean, I don't think he laid out a case to voters. This is why you should vote for me, and this is why, This is what you should be excited and mobilized about. I think he ran a largely defensive campaign. It was kind of a conservative, protect my place where I am campaign.
Right.
I think so. He could have run a more proactive effort on who he is, and I think that perhaps would have done him better.
Yeah, I mean, I think hindsight is always 20/20,
Sure,
and so
sure.
and also we weren't running the campaigns.
Right.
There are reasons
There were reasons
for
that
that.
we
Yes,
did, yeah.
right. But I do think that when you say Warner was on the defensive, I think he didn't respond at all to I would call them attacks. They were intended to be attacks. But when Gillespie says Warner votes 97% with Obama, well, then the response is, well, let me tell you what I voted for. Let me tell you what we did. Let me tell you how I got there. But there was no response, right? And so by not responding, that hangs out there. And so people say, particularly if they're independents or they're on the fence, and they say, well, I'm not really a fan of the president, and he's voting 97% of the time with them. Well, then I guess I know, either I'm going to stay home or I'm going to vote for one of the other candidates. I think he just wasn't aggressive enough about making any kind of case, whether it was a positive case for himself or whether it was a case to say, absolutely, this is my voting record and I'm proud of it because let me tell you what I've done for the Commonwealth of Virginia or what we've done for the American people. I think he could have turned that around in a very effective way, and he in particular could have turned it around in a very effective way because he could also fall back on how he worked across the aisle to do some of the things that were done. But he didn't say anything. I think that just left this kind of vacuum.
So fast forward a bit. Gillespie, Obenshain, others. Some would say the Republicans have significant choices and people who may be vying for statewide office in the future.
I'm fascinated by the Gillespie governor question. He says no. I think it's worth remembering that the Gillespie campaign staff and team was largely Obenshain's. So if in fact Gillespie does decide to run, I mean, they have to sort out the staff issue, which might be a difficult thing to sort out. Gillespie so far has said no, he's not interested in running for governor. So
again, not a shorter time away then. Next year is the off year with all members of the General Assembly up for election. There are hot issues that they still have not resolved, and the 2015 session just around the corner. Do you see anything from what's happened this year or what's maybe not happened in the General Assembly that would cause you to reflect some and be interested in polling on
Well,
for
I
the
can
General
tell you from
Assembly?
the exit poll that we did, again, in Hanover County, which is very, very conservative, the issues that Hanover County voters said were important to them in the Commonwealth of Virginia included Medicaid expansion, included transportation, and included ethics reform.
Medicaid expansion?
Yes.
Hanover
Now,
County, yeah.
that doesn't necessarily mean they're in favor of it. That might mean they want to put a nail in the coffin, and
Right,
you know.
okay,
And so
yes.
we didn't ask them
Yes.
to expand on that. But the point is, I don't necessarily see the issues suddenly being different from what they've been for the last several years. I think that it becomes very, very important who ends up either elected or reelected next year, because I think those issues, because they've been on people's minds for so long, and because the governor has probably very different opinions about many of them than, say, Hanover County voters might, I think next year's elections become very important. But I was surprised to see issues that had sort of perennially been there. I thought, well, maybe this group of people is turning out to vote and thinking, okay, this is time for a change, or let's go down a different path. Those were the three issues that were most important.
You know, we talk in congressional elections about whether a race is going to be nationalized or whether it's going to be localized, right? So I think Democrats, if they hope to gain any ground on some of these issues like Medicaid expansion, they have to stateize these elections next year. They've got to make them about statewide questions. If the elections are localized, so if the local delegate and the local senator go back to their districts and run as the local delegate and local senator, here's what I do for the district, Republicans are going to win, probably win all the seats that they have right now, and they might even take a seat or two away from Democrats. If Democrats can manage to make this a statewide referendum on some of these issues, like how to pay for the transportation funding that isn't coming because Congress isn't going to let us tax the internet, how to whether we should expand Medicaid or not. I think then Democrats might be in a better position to gain a seat or two and at least have the statewide referendum on these issues. I really think it comes down to that. Can Democrats make these statewide issues? Can it be a statewide question? Does every local Republican and Democrat running for election or re-election have to address the big question that the whole state is addressing? Or do these just simply become local races?
But I think there's also an issue with candidate recruitment. I think the Democrats have historically struggled to recruit qualified challengers to many of in many of these General Assembly districts, and I think that's going to continue to be an issue for them. So I think you're absolutely right. You have to kind of make this a broader question. It has to be a statewide issue that people have to talk about. But it isn't going to matter if there's nobody challenging the Republican who's serving in that General Assembly seat. So they kind of have, I think, a twofold problem. One is, how do you make this a broad enough issue that people are really talking about it across the Commonwealth? And then how do you make sure you've got candidates that actually have a fighting chance, or that you have a candidate at all? Because as we've talked before in the past, David, you know, we've got more and more this tendency for people not to run against an incumbent in the Commonwealth. And so many seats are just going uncontested, and I think that poses a problem.
That's really good
Well,
point.
and 2 years ago, we saw 2 House committee chairs defeated in primaries, and already the buzz around the Capitol, and I'm sure, and you're hearing it very much too, is that there will be even more people primaried. And every time I've heard that, it's Republicans being primaried. I've yet to hear of a Democrat who would be primaried.
Yeah, I couldn't name a Democrat worried about being primaried, but you can name several
Oh, yes.
Republicans who are worried about it.
Well, and I think, again, sort of the role of the Tea Party, or people who support the Tea Party, is it's really interesting to me. So we asked people on our exit survey, are you a member of the, you know, what comes closest to your opinion? Are you a member of the Tea Party? You support them? You don't? You know, 2/3, close to 70% said they were either members of the Tea Party or that they supported what the Tea Party believes in. Now, again, that's in Hanover. That's a very conservative county. But certainly if you look around at the role that, if not the Tea Party itself, but very conservative supporters or sympathizers with the Tea Party has been playing, I think that's a real worry for Republicans. Democrats, there's nothing that's remotely
There's no equivalent to that,
right?
yeah.
I mean, but for the Republican, I think it is also leading many Republicans to sort of speak more to the right of the issues.
I wish we had another half hour. But thank you, Dr. Bell, Dr. Kidd, for being on This Week in Richmond. We look forward to having you both back again.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by Dignity Memorial, caring for our communities with a network of funeral homes and cemeteries in Virginia and throughout North America. More information about Dignity Memorial's providers is online at dignitymemorial.com. Alpha Natural Resources, an energy company dedicated to respecting the land. Alpha Natural Resources, we power the world through the energy of our people. Haley Buick GMC, the place for a new Verano or Terrain Denali, in Richmond and online at haleybuickgmc.com. Everywhere there are lighting poles, there's one more opportunity to save money. Intelligent Illuminations provides cost-effective wireless lighting solutions for roadway or area outdoor lights. The Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the voice of the Virginia business community, working in legislative, regulatory, and political arenas to promote the free enterprise system. Additional support is provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.